A bakery window, white bread, chocolate eclairs, wedding cake stacked 3 high. July 1944, rural Pennsylvania. A German prisoner stares through glass at what shouldn't exist. This is the story of how a 10-minute truck ride through an American town destroyed everything these soldiers believed about winning the war. July 18, 1944, Camp Alva, Oklahoma. Klaus Becker's hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from fear, not from cold. It was 95 degrees in the back of the truck. His hands shook because every molecule of certainty he'd carried for 3 years was draining out of him through his fingertips, replaced by something that felt like drowning on dry land. Through the slats of the transport truck, he watched America pass by, and it was impossible. The truck rumbled down Main Street in some nowhere town, population maybe 3,000, carrying 15 German prisoners to a canning factory where they'd work the peach harvest. Standard assignment, standard route. Nothing about this day should have mattered, except Klaus Becker couldn't breathe. "Schau," he whispered to Friedrich beside him. "Look." But Friedrich was already looking. They were all looking. The shop windows were full. Not rationed, not sparse, not making do with substitutes. Full. A butcher shop displayed whole sides of beef in the window, the meat so fresh it still glistened. Next door, a grocer had built a pyramid of oranges, actual oranges, 3 feet tall. A hand-lettered sign read, "California Naval, 15 cents a pound. 15 cents a pound. For oranges." In July 1944, Klaus pressed his face against the wooden slat, feeling the splinter dig into his cheekbone. The pain helped. It confirmed this was real, not delirium, not heat stroke, not a propaganda film staged to break them. A bakery came into view. Klaus's breath caught. The window display looked like something from a fever dream. White bread, pure white bread, not the gray Kriegsbrat mixed with sawdust and potato starch they'd eaten since 1940. Cakes with real frosting, eclairs, cream puffs. A 3-tiered wedding cake with sugar flowers, each petal individually formed, a casual masterpiece of abundance. "Das ist unmöglich," Friedrich muttered. "That's impossible." But it wasn't impossible. It was there, real, solid. Behind glass in a town whose name Klaus didn't even know. The truck slowed at an intersection. That's when Klaus saw the cars. Not military vehicles, personal automobiles, dozens of them, lined up along both sides of the street, parked casually, paint jobs gleaming in the summer sun. Fords, Chevrolets, Buicks. A woman, maybe 30, wearing a floral dress and white gloves, walked out of a dress shop carrying shopping bags. She opened the driver's door of a blue sedan, slid behind the wheel, and drove away. Just drove away. In her own car, with gasoline, in the middle of a world war. Klaus had grown up in Hamburg. His father had owned a printing business, successful enough to afford a car, one car, that they'd driven on Sundays before the war. By 1942, civilian gasoline was a memory. By 1943, the car itself had been requisitioned. The party elite still drove. Everyone else walked or took trams that ran less and less frequently as the fuel dried up. Here, housewives drove to buy oranges. "They're not even at war," someone whispered behind him. Heinrich, the Berliner who'd taught Klaus how to identify American aircraft from their engine sounds. "Look at them. They don't know there's a war." And it was true. The sidewalks were full of civilians moving without urgency. A group of teenage boys lounged outside a drugstore, drinking something from glass bottles. Coca-Cola, Klaus realized. He'd seen it in British captured supplies. Laughing about something, carefree. They looked maybe 17, old enough to fight. But they weren't fighting. They were drinking soda on a Tuesday afternoon. Meanwhile, 17-year-olds in Germany were manning anti-aircraft guns in Berlin, dying in the rubble of Hamburg, freezing in the remnants of Army Group Center. The truck turned a corner. A billboard advertised war bonds. Back the attack. Buy bonds. Beside it, a movie theater marquee announced a double feature. Below that, a restaurant with checkered curtains and an open sign. Restaurants? Open. Serving food to anyone who walked in with money. Klaus felt something crack inside his chest. A physical sensation like ice breaking. They'd been lied to. Not about tactics, not about strategy. About everything that mattered. And if this moment hit you the way it hit Klaus, if you're realizing that everything these men believed was built on sand, a like tells me these forgotten stories matter, because what happened next changed not just their war, but their entire understanding of what war means. Rewind. 3 years earlier, September 1941, Wilhelmshaven, Germany. Klaus Becker, 22 years old, stood in formation while Lieutenant Schroeder explained why they would win the war. The explanation was simple, mathematical, inevitable. The British are starving. Our U-boats control the Atlantic. Every week we sink 100,000 tons of their shipping. They're down to powdered eggs and sawdust bread. Churchill is rationing sugar, meat, butter, everything. By Christmas, they'll be begging for terms. Klaus believed this because the numbers supported it, because Schroeder showed them captured British ration books. 4 ounces of butter per person per week, 2 ounces of cheese, 1 egg. Pathetic. Proof that the blockade was working. And the Americans? Someone asked. Schroeder laughed. The Americans can't even feed themselves. They had bread lines 5 years ago. Their factories are outdated. They're soft, decadent, weakened by their mongrel democracy. They won't fight, and if they do, they won't last 6 months against German steel. Klaus believed this too. Why wouldn't he? The newsreels showed it. Depression-era America. Soup kitchens. Desperate men selling apples on street corners. That was 1936, true. But how much could change in 5 years? The propaganda was sophisticated because it started from partial truth. Yes, America had suffered through the Depression. Yes, their military in 1939 was smaller than Poland's. Yes, their society was, from a Nazi perspective, chaotically individualistic, weakened by racial mixing and Jewish influence. What the propaganda didn't mention, industrial capacity. The propaganda didn't mention that American factories, once mobilized, could outproduce all of Europe combined. The propaganda didn't mention that America's agricultural abundance was so vast they'd spent the 1930s paying farmers not to grow crops because they produced too much. The propaganda didn't prepare Klaus Becker for the reality of American wealth. So when he shipped out to North Africa in 1942, Klaus carried absolute certainty. Germany would win because Germany had to win. Their cause was righteous, their military superior, their enemies weak. By May 1943, that certainty was complicated by the fact that he was a prisoner of war. May 22, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Klaus didn't remember surrendering. He remembered the American artillery, endless, mechanized thunder that made the earth itself scream. He remembered his unit scattered, the lieutenant dead, water gone, ammunition gone. He remembered stumbling out of a wadi with his hands up, expecting to be shot. The American GI who took his surrender was maybe 19. Farm boy face. He searched Klaus efficiently, took his documents, handed him a canteen. "Drink," he said in broken German. Klaus drank. The water tasted like metal and salvation. Cigarette? The American offered a pack, Lucky Strikes, like they were standing in a cafe, not a battlefield where 60 men from Klaus's company had died that morning. Klaus took one. His hands shook as the American lit it. "War's over for you, buddy," the GI said in English. Klaus didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, casual, almost friendly, completely unconcerned. Like capturing enemy soldiers was routine, like this war was already won. That should have been Klaus's first hint. June 1943. Camp Shanks, New York. The ocean crossing took 11 days. Klaus and 400 other German prisoners traveled in the hold of a Liberty ship, crammed together, seasick, certain they were being transported to some American version of a concentration camp. They'd been briefed on American brutality, the mongrelized society, the cultural degeneracy, the Jewish influence that would surely demand vengeance. They arrived at New York Harbor at dawn. Through the porthole, Klaus saw the Manhattan skyline. He thought he was hallucinating. The buildings were too tall, too many, too bright. The harbor itself was full of ships, not warships, cargo vessels, dozens of them, moving with coordinated efficiency, loading and unloading as if submarine warfare didn't exist. On the dock, American soldiers processed them with bureaucratic boredom, forms, numbers, medical checks, delousing. The medic who examined Klaus was professional, impersonal, and gave him a clean bill of health in under 5 minutes. Then they fed them white bread sandwiches with actual ham, an apple, a cookie, coffee with real sugar. Klaus ate slowly, trying to process the cognitive dissonance. This was a prisoner meal, rations for enemy combatants. It was better than anything he'd eaten in the last year of fighting. Friedrich, standing in line beside him, whispered, "This is for show. They're fattening us up before the interrogations." Klaus nodded. That made sense. Classic psychological warfare: show abundance to break morale, then exploit the resulting confusion. Except the interrogations never came. Instead, they were loaded onto trains. Proper passenger trains with seats, not cattle cars. The windows weren't barred. Klaus could see out as America rolled past. Farms with full silos, towns with lit street lights, factories with smokestacks pumping at full capacity. No bomb damage, no ruins, no evidence of rationing or sacrifice or war. Just America, vast and untouched, going about its business. "Where's the war?" Heinrich asked, face pressed to the glass. Nobody answered, because the answer was obvious and impossible to accept. The war wasn't here. The war was somewhere else. America was fighting a global conflict on 3 continents and 4 oceans, and the homeland looked like peacetime. July 1943, Camp Alva, Oklahoma. Camp Alva sat in the middle of nothing, flat prairie, summer heat that baked the earth to concrete. Horizons so wide, Klaus felt like an insect under a magnifying glass. The camp itself was basic: barracks, mess hall, parade ground, guard towers, standard POW facility, except for the food. Breakfast, oatmeal with milk and sugar, toast with butter, real butter, yellow and soft. Coffee, fresh fruit, apples or bananas, depending on the day. Lunch, meat, actual meat, chicken, pork, occasionally beef, vegetables, bread, dessert. Dinner, same portions as lunch. The Geneva Convention specified that prisoners should receive the same rations as the captor's army. Fine. But that meant American soldiers ate like this every day, 3 full meals. Meat at every lunch and dinner, white bread, sugar, milk. Klaus did the math. The Wehrmacht had been on reduced rations since 1941. By 1943, soldiers at the front received 700 grams of bread per day, mixed with potato starch, 120 grams of meat, 30 grams of butter. Officers got slightly more, civilians got less. Here, Klaus estimated he was eating double that, as a prisoner. "They're trying to make us soft," Friedrich insisted, "make us forget how to fight." But Klaus wasn't so sure. The Americans didn't act like they were trying to break them. They acted like feeding prisoners this much was normal, automatic, not even worth commenting on. The work assignment started in mid-July. Labor shortages from the draft meant POWs could work on farms, in canneries, anywhere they could replace missing American workers. The pay was 80 cents a day in camp scrip, enough to buy cigarettes, toiletries, candy bars at the canteen. Klaus was assigned to agricultural work, a different American town every few weeks, wherever the harvest was happening. Wheat, corn, peaches. That's how he ended up in the back of a truck rolling through a Pennsylvania town on a Tuesday afternoon, watching his entire world view shatter against the reality of a bakery window. July 18, 1944. The truck ride. The bakery disappeared behind them. The truck turned onto a highway, picking up speed, leaving the town behind. Klaus sat back, no longer looking out. His hands had stopped shaking. Now he just felt hollow. Heinrich broke the silence. "Propaganda." "What?" "It's propaganda. They staged it. The whole town, the bakery, the cars, the civilians. They knew we'd drive through. They set it up to break our morale. Klaus wanted to believe that. It would make sense. It would mean Germany was still strong, America still weak, victory still possible. But it was bullshit. You can't stage an entire town. You can't fake the way that woman got into her car, casual, automatic, the muscle memory of someone who drives every day. You can't fake the dust on those parked automobiles, the worn paint on the drugstore sign, the bored teenage faces of boys too young to draft. It's not propaganda, Klaus said quietly. It's just America. No, Friedrich's voice was sharp. No, you're falling for it. This is what they want. They don't want anything. Klaus's voice rose. That's the point. They don't need to want anything. They already have everything. Silence in the truck. Then Hans, who'd been quiet this whole time, spoke up. Hans from Munich, who'd fought in Russia before Africa. My wife wrote me last month, her ration card, 280 grams of bread per day. That's it. Bread mixed with sawdust because there's no wheat. The children are hungry. His voice cracked on the last word. My mother wrote, someone else said. The British bombed Cologne again. She's living in the basement. No windows, no heat. My brother died in Stalingrad. My cousin in Hamburg. My father in North Africa. One by one they spoke. The accumulated losses, the rationing, the air raids, the reality back home that every letter confirmed Germany was bleeding out, and here in America, housewives drove cars to buy oranges. Klaus closed his eyes. Behind his lids, he saw Hamburg burning. He'd heard about it in camp, July 1943, Operation Gomorrah, the RAF dropping incendiaries until the city became a firestorm that sucked oxygen from the air and cooked people alive in bomb shelters. 40,000 dead, his hometown, his street, his parents. He'd received the Red Cross letter 2 months ago, short, factual, regret to inform, casualties of war, and here Americans ate eclairs. Subscribe to hear the rest of this story, and others the history books forgot. Because what Klaus discovered next would change everything he thought about loyalty, nation, and what it means to survive. August 1944. Peach harvest, Georgia. The farm belonged to a man named William Patterson. 60-something leathered skin from a lifetime in the sun, spoke slowly and watched the POWs with the same expression he used for his farm equipment. Cautious assessment. You boys know how to pick peaches without bruising them? Klaus, now designated interpreter because his English was marginally better than Friedrich's, translated. Patterson nodded. Good, we're behind schedule. My sons are in France. My field hands got drafted. It's just me, my wife, and you fellows. So let's not fuck around. Klaus decided not to translate fuck around. The work was hard. Peach trees don't care about your philosophy or politics or shattered worldview. They need picking, careful and fast, before the fruit drops and rots. Klaus learned to judge ripeness by touch, to twist and lift without tearing the stem, to stack the crates so they wouldn't bruise in transport. Patterson paid them in camp script plus lunch. Sandwiches his wife made, thick with cold cuts and cheese, plus lemonade and cookies. Real cookies. Oatmeal raisin, still warm from the oven. Mrs. Patterson, Betty, she insisted they call her Betty, brought them out to the orchard wrapped in a kitchen towel. She was maybe 50, soft around the middle with tired eyes and smile lines. I figure you boys are somebody's sons, too, she said. Eat up, Klaus translated. The men ate in confused silence. That night, back in camp, Heinrich tried again. It's a trick. They're trying to make us loyal. Make us forget we're German. But Klaus noticed Heinrich had eaten 3 cookies. September 1944. Camp Alva. News filtered into camp through guards, Red Cross packages, and new prisoners. The news was uniformly bad for Germany. Paris liberated. Romania switching sides. The Eastern Front collapsing. American and British armies driving toward the Rhine. In the camp canteen, Klaus bought a Coca-Cola and a candy bar with his work script. The Coke cost a nickel. The Hershey bar cost another nickel. He had $3 saved. $3 from picking peaches and hauling crates. More money than he'd seen in 2 years of Wehrmacht service. He sat outside the barracks sipping the Coke and tried to remember why he'd believed Germany would win. The memory felt distant, theoretical, like trying to remember childhood certainties. The tooth fairy, Santa Claus, invincibility. He'd believed because authority told him to believe, because the newsreels showed victories, because doubt was dangerous, questioning was treason, and certainty was survival. But certainty was expensive. It cost you the ability to see what was real. Klaus finished the Coke. The bottle was glass, heavy with Coca-Cola, embossed in cursive script. He turned it over in his hand, studying the craftsmanship. Even the bottles were quality. Even the disposable things were made to last. "You're quiet lately," Friedrich said, sitting down beside him. "I'm thinking." "About?" "About how we lost." Friedrich tensed. "The war's not the war," Klaus interrupted. "I mean before the war. We lost before we started because we didn't understand what we were fighting." "What are you talking about?" Klaus held up the Coke bottle. "This. We thought America was weak because they had bread lines in '36. We thought democracy made them soft. We thought our discipline, our focus, our sacrifice would beat their chaos. And we were measuring the wrong things." Klaus set the bottle down carefully. "We measured willpower. They measured factories. We measured sacrifice. They measured production. We were ready to die for victory. They were ready to simply outmake us." Friedrich stared at him. "You sound like you're giving up." "I'm done pretending. That's different." "Pretending what?" "Pretending that riding past a bakery window doesn't matter. Pretending that housewives driving cars is propaganda. Pretending that we didn't see exactly what we saw. A country that can fight a war on 3 continents and still have wedding cakes in small-town bakeries." Klaus leaned back against the barracks wall. The Oklahoma sky was huge, scattered with stars, more stars than he'd ever seen in Hamburg's light-polluted nights. "Do you know what we lost?" he said quietly. "We lost reality. We traded it for a story, a beautiful story about destiny and strength and righteous struggle. And the story felt so good, so true, that we stopped checking whether it matched what was actually real." "You're talking like a traitor." "I'm talking like someone who finally woke up." Friedrich stood, angry. "You think surrender means wisdom? You think because they feed us well, that makes them right?" "No." Klaus stayed seated. "It doesn't make them right. It makes them real. And that's more important." Friedrich walked away. Klaus stayed looking at stars, holding an empty Coke bottle, feeling something like peace. December 1944, Camp Alva, Christmas. The camp guards decorated the mess hall, tinsel, a tree, even a wreath on the door. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't so pointed, celebrating Christmas with the men whose bombers were currently turning German cities to ash. But Christmas dinner was real. Turkey, stuffing, mashed potatoes with gravy, cranberry sauce, pie, actual pie, apple and pumpkin, both. Klaus ate slowly, tasting each bite, trying to memorize the flavors. Not because it was delicious, though it was, but because it was evidence. Proof that this was real, that he hadn't imagined the bakery window, the orchards of Georgia, the casual abundance that no propaganda could explain away. After dinner, some of the men gathered in the barracks to sing carols, German carols, the ones they'd grown up with. Stille Nacht, O Tannenbaum. The harmonies were rough, homesick, achingly familiar. Klaus didn't sing. He sat on his bunk, writing a letter he'd never send because mail to Hamburg went to an address that no longer existed, to parents who were ash in a firestorm. "Dear Mother and Father, I am alive. I am fed. I am safe. I think you would find that funny. Your son safe while Germany burns. I wish I could tell you what I've learned. I wish I could explain that everything we believed was a story told by men who needed us to stop asking questions. But you can't hear me now, and maybe that's mercy. I saw a bakery window in July, white bread, chocolate eclairs, wedding cakes. That's how I knew we'd lost. Not because they beat us in battle, though they did, but because they never had to choose. They could make war and wedding cakes. Sacrifice and abundance, both simultaneously without contradiction. We chose sacrifice, we chose discipline, we chose absolute commitment to victory, and they chose to keep their bakeries full. I don't know which is more moral, but I know which is more powerful. I miss you. I hope you didn't suffer. I hope the end was quick. Your son, Klaus. He folded the letter, tucked it into his footlocker, and lay back on his bunk. Someone asked if he wanted to sing. Klaus shook his head. Outside, Oklahoma winter wind rattled the barracks. Inside, German soldiers sang Christmas carols in a prisoner of war camp, and Klaus Becker thought about reality versus story and which one you could build a future on. April 1945, Camp Alva. The news came through official channels. Hitler dead. Berlin fallen. Germany surrendered. Unconditional surrender. Total defeat. Klaus felt nothing. Or maybe he felt everything, compressed into a numbness so complete it felt like peace. Some men wept. Some raged. Heinrich smashed his bunk frame, requiring the guards to restrain him. Friedrich simply stared at the wall for 6 hours. Klaus walked outside. The Oklahoma sky was blue, cloudless, vast. The war was over. Germany was destroyed. His city was rubble. His family was gone. His country was occupied. Everything he'd fought for, bled for, believed in, erased. And Klaus Becker was alive. He sat on the ground back against the barracks and tried to figure out what that meant. Survivor's guilt, maybe, or survivor's confusion. He'd expected death in combat, in a bombing, in a camp. He'd expected to die for something. Instead, he'd lived through picking peaches. A guard approached. Young guy, maybe 22. You okay? Klaus looked up. I don't know. The guard nodded, like that was a reasonable answer. He sat down, not quite beside Klaus, but close. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For what? I don't know. Everything, I guess. The guard pulled out a pack of Lucky Strikes, offered one to Klaus. My dad fought in the first one. He said the worst part wasn't dying. It was coming home and realizing everything you fought for was bullshit. Klaus took the cigarette. Your father sounds wise. He's a drunk who can't hold a job. But yeah, maybe wise too. They smoked in silence. What happens now? Klaus asked. You'll go home eventually, maybe next year, year after. Depends on repatriation schedules. Home. Klaus tasted the word. It felt foreign. What's home? The guard shrugged. Wherever you make it, I guess. June 1946. Bremerhaven, Germany. The ship that carried Klaus back to Germany was American, staffed by Americans, processed by Americans. Even in defeat, America ran the logistics. He stood on deck as the harbor came into view. Bremerhaven was rubble, not damaged, not bombed. Rubble. The city had been systematically destroyed, block by block, until nothing remained but broken walls and German civilians picking through the ruins. Klaus descended the gangway with 200 other repatriated POWs. They were given papers, told to report to the British zone authorities, and released. Just like that. 3 years a prisoner, now free. He walked into the ruins of Bremerhaven with nowhere to go. Hamburg was 90 miles north, or what used to be Hamburg. Klaus had no idea if anything remained, no way to know if any friends, distant relatives, anyone he'd known had survived. He started walking. 3 days later, he stood on Münkebergstrasse, or what was left of it, and stared at the skeleton of his childhood. Every building was gone. Every street was rubble. The whole city was a graveyard. But people were rebuilding. Brick by brick, stone by stone, Germans were clearing rubble and laying foundations for something new. Klaus found work with a construction crew. The pay was worthless. Reichsmarks were garbage. Everyone traded cigarettes and food. But the work was real. Hauling stone, mixing mortar, building walls. At night, he lived in a basement with 7 other men. They shared rations, traded stories, and tried to figure out what being German meant now that Germany was a concept, not a country. "You were in America," someone asked one night. "What's it like?" Klaus thought about bakery windows, peach orchards, Coca-Cola bottles, Christmas dinner. "It's real," he said finally. "That's what it's like, just real." Nobody understood, but nobody pushed. December 1950, Hamburg, West Germany. Klaus married a widow named Greta. She had a son from her first husband, killed in Russia, and Klaus adopted the boy. They lived in a rebuilt apartment, small but solid, with running water and electricity most days. Klaus worked as a foreman for a construction company. The Marshall Plan money was flooding in, rebuilding West Germany at a pace that shocked everyone. In 4 years, Hamburg had gone from rubble to a functioning city. One night, Greta asked him about the war. "Do you ever regret it? The surrender, I mean. Do you wish you'd kept fighting?" Klaus looked at his wife, her son, his son now, asleep in the next room. The apartment was warm. Tomorrow they'd have bread with butter. Real butter, delivered through the Marshall Plan, manufactured in America, given freely to the people who'd tried to destroy them. "No," Klaus said, "I don't regret surviving." "But the defeat." "We were defeated before I surrendered. We were defeated before the war started. We just didn't know it because we chose the story instead of reality." Greta frowned. "I don't understand." "There was a bakery window," Klaus said. "July 1944, Pennsylvania, wedding cakes, eclairs, white bread. And I knew right then we'd lost, not because they beat us, because they didn't have to choose. They could have both, war and wedding cakes. We could only have war." He reached across the table, took his wife's hand. "So no, I don't regret surrender. I regret that we made surrender necessary. I regret that we built everything on a story instead of truth. I regret my parents died believing that story." "But you don't regret living?" "Never." Greta squeezed his hand. In the next room, the boy stirred but didn't wake. Klaus Becker had seen the bakery window. He'd seen the orchards, the Coca-Cola bottles, the casual abundance of a country that could make war and wedding cakes simultaneously. He'd learned that reality always wins. That stories are beautiful but fragile. That certainty is expensive. And that sometimes survival means letting the story die so truth can live. Epilogue, August 1985, Hamburg, West Germany. Klaus Becker, 76 years old, watched his grandson, Greta's grandson, his by love, prepare for university. The boy was studying engineering. Smart kid, curious, asked too many questions, which Klaus loved. "Opa," the boy said, "you never talk about the war." "No," Klaus agreed. "I don't." "Why?" Klaus considered. The war had been over for 40 years. Germany was rebuilt, prosperous, democratic. The story that had destroyed his generation was dead. Only the survivors remained, and they were dying too. "Because," Klaus said slowly, "the war taught me something important, and I don't want to teach it by talking about the war." "What did it teach you?" "That reality is more important than story. That you can believe something with absolute certainty and be absolutely wrong. That the hardest thing isn't dying for what you believe. It's living long enough to realize what you believed was a lie." The boy frowned. "That's dark, Opa." "Yes," Klaus said, "but it's true, and truth matters more than comfort." He thought about a bakery window in Pennsylvania, July 1944, 41 years ago. The memory was still sharp, white bread, eclairs, wedding cakes. The moment his certainty died. "When you go to university," Klaus said, "promise me something." "What?" "Question everything, especially the things that make you feel righteous. Especially the stories that sound too good, too true, too perfectly aligned with what you want to believe." "Why?" "Because stories can kill you. Reality keeps you alive." His grandson nodded, not quite understanding, but willing to trust. Klaus returned to his newspaper. West Germany was debating reunification. The Cold War was thawing. History moved forward, inevitable and strange. Klaus Becker had survived by learning to see reality instead of story. He'd picked peaches in Georgia, drunk Coca-Cola in Oklahoma, rebuilt Hamburg brick by brick. He'd lived through the death of certainty and found something more valuable on the other side: truth. The bakery window had taught him that. A 10-minute truck ride through an American town 41 years ago had saved his life by destroying his faith. And Klaus Becker, 76 years old, survivor of the war that was supposed to last 1,000 years, decided that was a fair trade. Reality, after all, always wins.